Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar from the Reiki Guild. Sorry about the technical hitch at the beginning, but hopefully we are all up and running now. So just before we start, as usual, I'm going to go through a few technical bits and pieces just in case this is your first time on one of our webinars. So if you can't hear us, check that your speakers are on and that you haven't got any loose connections anywhere. Often there's a simple explanation and sometimes it's that I have forgotten to turn something on. So again, you may have to tell me if you can't hear me. Sometimes our internet or yours drops out for a few minutes and you may lose the sound, but if you hang on, it often comes back. The internet is something that we don't have any control over, and obviously some people have got better connection than others, but don't panic. Now, on the top right-hand corner of your screen, you should be seeing a chat box, and you can put questions and comments in there that I can read. Now, if you are watching this on an iPad, you may be able to see the chat box, but it doesn't always work. As far as I know, GoToWebinar were trying to fix this problem, but I'm not entirely sure whether they have or not. So if any of you are listening on an iPad, it'd be great to know if it does work for you. As I say, you can type messages and comments in there, or you can also raise your hand to attract my attention. And you do that by clicking on what looks like a little yellow glove. So just to check that everything's working and you're actually hearing me, could you just click on that yellow glove so that I can see that you can hear me? Great. That's excellent. So that just reassures me that I'm not talking into the ether and no one can hear me. Fantastic, thanks. You can probably see on the webcam that I'm using headphones. For me, this improves the quality of the recording, but at the end of the session, when we have an opportunity for questions, I do sometimes open the line to you so that you can ask your questions directly. And if you've got headphones, sometimes it's much clearer for us to hear you. But don't worry if you haven't. It's not essential. Okay, so moving swiftly onwards, those of you who aren't members of the Reiki Guild, we are a Reiki professional association and we honour the lineage and teachings of Mikao Usui. So we are a Usui Reiki lineage. We are a highly professional association and community of teachers and practitioners. And what we do is we offer training and support like this evening's webinar. We have networking events and we also have fun events often around the country because we have members from Scotland all the way down to the southwest and one or two overseas as well, I think. So that's who we are. Now, our topic this evening is a really interesting one, and we've had a lot of interest in the topic tonight. I think this is probably one of our, we've probably got more people registered for this webinar than for any of our webinars previously. And we're going to be looking at an exploratory study of Reiki experiences in women who have had cancer. And I'm joined this evening by Maxine Stead, who's a Reiki master, and I'm going to let her introduce herself and tell you how she ended up doing this work and what she does now. She is going to give a talk to you about the study that she's done, and then at the end there should be some time for questions. If you have any questions as we go along, do type them into the box, and it may be that if I see that it's something that's immediately relevant or something that I need Maxine to clarify, I will ask her then and then. But otherwise, I will save most of the questions to the end. But you might find that if you have an immediate question, you want to write it down before you forget it. Because, I forget if I don't write it down, I might forget by the time we get to the end. So by all means do that. So I'm just going to hand over the controls to Maxine so that she can run her presentation. So I'm just going to do a few clicks. And so Maxine, if you click on show your screen, then we should start to see your slides, and I'll hand the webinar over to you.
Great, thank you, Louise. Can you see my slides now?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, hello everybody. My name's Maxine. I'm based in Huddersfield in Yorkshire. A little bit just about my background. I used to work in cancer clinical research, initially as a clinical trial manager, and then I became part of the National Cancer Research Network, which was set up by the government to increase the number of people taking part in NHS cancer research. And I worked in the field of cancer research for about 14 years and then got a bit disillusioned with the politics and travelling, and decided to have a career change. And so in 2007 I set up a holistic health spa called Alexandra House, which is based in Huddersfield. And I trained as a Reiki therapist, and was blown away really by Reiki. I'm sure most of you have experienced that before. And I always felt that I wanted to combine my research experience with my new interest in Reiki. And one of my customers at the spa was a researcher at Huddersfield University called Serena McCluskey. And we got together, and she bizarrely also used to work in cancer research in Leeds with me, but we didn't actually work together. We got together and decided that we would do some research looking at Reiki in women with cancer. My PhD looked at quality of life in women with gynecological cancer. And so I was particularly interested in women with gynae cancer, but we felt it was a bit too limited, so we decided to initially just look at any women who have had cancer. And so last year we collaborated with another researcher, Marilyn Kirschbaum, who's now actually based in Australia. And interestingly, Serena and Marilyn, neither of them had Reiki before we actually did the research, and they both came to the spa and had some. Serena now comes regularly for Reiki, and Marilyn's trained herself in Reiki as a practitioner, which just goes to show how powerful a therapy it is. And again, you'll all be aware of that. So what I'm going to do today is go through the study that we carried out, and just explain why we did it, how we did it, and then some of the findings of the study. I'm also going to be giving you quite a lot of, it was a qualitative study, so with a qualitative study, what you're doing is asking people about their experiences and recording that. So there's lots of quotes from people, and I think that they're really powerful because it's really from their heart, so you really get to see the impact that the Reiki's had on them. So just some background as to why we decided to do the study. Treatment for cancer is getting better. There's lots of advances. There's still a long way to go for lots of different cancer types, but cancer survival rates are increasing and more people are living with cancer. And that means that the management of their long-term psychosocial health is really important. Once they finish the initial treatments, then they want to reintegrate back into their normal life, but there are always issues such as the fear of recurrence and ongoing physical and emotional problems. And so it's really important to keep helping people living with cancer, or people who have had cancer, living as they are living longer. Studies have shown that more and more people are using complementary therapies in addition to the medical treatments that people have. Often they're associated with lots of not very pleasant side effects. And also there's the emotional stress of having cancer, and sometimes that is unfortunately, some people don't have a great prognosis, and they have to adapt to that. And complementary therapies are a great tool to help people relax at quite a deep level, and help them with some of the problems that they might be experiencing. Sorry, I've put this next bullet point is about Reiki. I'm assuming everybody knows about Reiki, but just to reiterate that it's an energy-based natural therapy. There's limited research looking at Reiki in any disease area, and in specifically cancer. So what we wanted to do is try and explore what people had experienced when they'd had Reiki as part of their cancer treatments and cancer rehabilitation. Previous research in cancer has tended to look at people during the diagnosis stage, so for example during biopsy, and then during the initial chemotherapy or radiotherapy. I'm particularly interested in the time after the treatment and how Reiki might help people get back to some sort of normality and coping with the impact of the treatment, and then trying to get back into going to work and family life, etc. But there's not very much research that's looked at that. The research that has been done has tended to be really short periods of Reiki, so maybe 10 or 20 minutes, and maybe just giving it once or twice. And I'm particularly interested in looking at a longer term period of having Reiki, maybe over a 6-month period, and having it on a monthly basis. And again, there's just very limited research looking at that longer term impact of Reiki and how Reiki might be able to help people with cancer. But the studies that have been carried out have shown a range of improvements: fatigue, anxiety, mood, reductions in pain and discomfort, and improvements in general well-being. So a range of benefits have been seen, which is a great basis for looking at the impact on these people in more detail. There's been some other qualitative research done in Reiki outside the area of, and field of cancer that have shown some interesting sort of broader impact, where people realise that they do have their own capacity for healing. And we're very much taught in the medical field that you have an illness or an emotional issue and you go to your doctor and they give you a medicine for it and that makes it better. And when people experience Reiki, they actually realise they can take some responsibility for themselves, and that's quite empowering for people to realise that they can help themselves, and they don't have to either go to a doctor or actually take medication. Lots of people don't want to be on long-term medication. For me, medication often just masks the problem. It doesn't get to the root of it, and something like Reiki really gets to the cause of a problem and can help to relieve that problem. And the studies in other qualitative research in Reiki have shown people showing feelings of security, so feeling quite safe whilst they're having Reiki. A sense of awareness, again, about how they can take control over their own health and well-being. A feeling of being cared for. It's a very special thing, I think, to have a Reiki session, and it does touch you at quite a deep and emotional level. People have said that they feel quite open. I'm sure that's the chakras that have been open, but it opens their energy, and that they feel connected to the universe, to themselves, and that they feel that there's personal growth, and that they can allow themselves to focus on working with their own universal life energy. And what's interesting about these studies is that when you look at questionnaires that are often used in medical research to look at the impact of treatments on people's quality of life, these sorts of issues are not really covered. It covers things that you can measure, like pain and fatigue and nausea and vomiting. They very rarely tap into these more emotional things that actually Reiki, as you will all be aware and have experienced, I'm sure, tap into these more emotional issues. And so we very much felt, when we were looking at the previous research, that there hadn't really been any studies done that looked at these broader issues, and that the studies that had been done, sometimes they would say that, you know, there's no difference, there's no benefit of Reiki. And part of that, I think, is that we're not actually measuring what we need to be measuring in those studies, because, yes, it might help with the pain and the fatigue, but it also taps into these deeper issues. So we wanted to try and tease some of these issues out in the study that we set up. And so what we set out to do was to look at the beliefs and the perceptions and then the experiences of Reiki for women who were living with cancer. And this wasn't a study where we recruited people and gave them, you know, 2, 3, 4 courses of Reiki. It was more of a retrospective study looking at how people looked back on their experience of Reiki. What we would like to do in the future is a prospective study going forward, but at this point we were just trying to capture what are the issues and what are the things that people experienced and felt whilst they were having the Reiki, and how they felt that had benefited them. And then also to look, like I say, at looking at developing more relevant outcome measures for a bigger study. And so it's also really important when you're trying to apply for research funding that you've done some sort of pilot work, and so this was part of that early work. And we got a small grant from Huddersfield University to pay for travel expenses and transcription costs, so that meant that we could actually recompense the participants for their time. So what we did was a qualitative study in 10 women who had cancer. We collaborated with 2 local hospices, so Kirkwood Hospice is in Huddersfield and Overgate Hospice is in Elland, which is part of Halifax. And also a couple of people came from my spa who had been to the spa for Reiki. And what we did was we interviewed the women, so we had a semi-structured interview, and what we did was ask certain questions that were then tape recorded and transcribed, so somebody typed them out word for word, and then we analysed them, looking for different themes, looking for similarities and issues across the different people. So there was a range of participants. The average age was 63, a range of 31 to 84, so a good spread of age of women. The average time since diagnosis was 6 years, again a spread from 5 months to 25 years. There was a range of cancer diagnoses, so a whole host of different diagnoses. Interestingly, no one had had Reiki before they'd had cancer. At both of the hospices, people are offered Reiki and other complementary therapies if they would like to take them. And then the 2 people from the spa had actually paid for the Reiki at the spa. At the hospices, it's actually given free of charge. And most people had had about between 4 and 6 sessions of Reiki at the time that we'd actually interviewed them. So what we did is split the findings into 4 different timescales. So we asked people what their views and understanding of Reiki was before they'd actually had Reiki. We then talked to them about what their experiences of Reiki were whilst they were having the Reiki treatments, and then their experiences after the Reiki, so how it had impacted their life on the days and the weeks after Reiki, and then what they felt about Reiki once they'd actually experienced it. And so what we did is identify a number of key themes for each of these different timescales, and then a few different sub-themes within those. And so I'm going to present, like I said, a lot of different quotes that I'll probably put up, and then you can read through them. And the beauty of doing qualitative research is that you get the actual words from the people. So they're all Yorkshire, so you might see some Yorkshire E's and R's and ums and ahs in there. So if you know Yorkshire, imagine that someone's saying these things with a Yorkshire accent. So it was interesting when we asked people what their recollection of Reiki was before they'd actually had Reiki, most people didn't really know anything about Reiki. Some of them were quite sceptical, saying how could it possibly have an effect? And again, you'll all be familiar with that when you're talking to people. If they've not really heard of Reiki, they think, oh, what on earth could you possibly be talking about? You put your hands on me and I feel better. And it's the same with these people. Most of them had not really got much knowledge of Reiki and didn't really expect any benefit. And you'll see from the results that those views and opinions changed, not surprisingly, as they actually experienced the Reiki. So this was one of the participant quotes about what she thought about Reiki before she'd actually had it. Just let you read that. Again, people think, well, you can't measure it, so how could it possibly work? And that's just our, I guess, lack of understanding about how intricate our minds and bodies are. But although people had a lack of knowledge and they were quite sceptical, some people had really high hopes. So one lady said, I was waiting for a miracle. So it's interesting that, people are looking for something that will, particularly when they've got cancer, will really help them, and are happy to try things that will help. But she certainly felt like, she was hoping this was going to make a massive difference. And then looking now at how people experienced the Reiki whilst they were actually having the Reiki treatment, and this was quite a major area for us. And one of the big issues was what we entitled a release of emotional strain. So people feeling a physical release of energy, which was quite interesting. Like I say, they didn't really understand how Reiki was going to work. At the hospices, they're not very good at actually explaining what Reiki is and how it might help. And so people really didn't have much of an idea, but they were describing things, as you'll see in a minute, about an actual release of energy and feeling that release of energy. And also, many of them described the way in which having the Reiki helped clear the mind from the cancer, and just give them some space away from it. Often the treatments and the follow-up is very clinical and very medical focused and talking about the cancer, and so they were actually able to free the mind from that, which they found really beneficial. And then, not surprisingly, they experienced inner peace and relaxation, which is one of the key benefits, I think, of Reiki. And then they also described a feeling of being cared for. Again, that was something, if you remember, that the previous qualitative research had shown as an issue. That the people often felt that when they're in hospital and being followed up in hospital, it's very rushed, and they haven't really got time and they're waiting for the next patient to come in. And so actually having that quality time with somebody, they really felt that they were being cared for, and really appreciated that. They also experienced a range of physical sensations and feelings, and I'll show some examples of some of those things. So this is the first quote that I wanted to share with you about the release of energy that somebody described. Again, I'll just leave you a couple of minutes to read that. And I think that's a really powerful comment that she made about the impact that Reiki had. And again, you'll all be familiar with these types of experiences, but to actually see and hear them speaking like this was really powerful. And then another participant, well, she described it as a waterfall, which was quite nice, feeling it whoosh straight through her body. And then this lady describes how she felt the clearing of her mind from the cancer. And interesting how she talks about learning to forget things and just maybe giving them something else to think about, which obviously was a big benefit. And another quote from somebody about clearing the mind. And just a third quote. And then obviously most people when they have Reiki have an immense feeling of inner peace and relaxation. And I love the way that she describes it as feeling cocooned and love. Again, quite a contrast to the medical treatments that these people had been receiving. I don't think anybody wants to get off the table when they've had Reiki. And again, that tingling feeling, I think, is really interesting that people picked that up, without really being prompted that might happen to them, and that's the energy moving about. And then a quote here about, as an example of a feeling of being cared for. And I think people just really appreciating that quality time that they had. And then a range of physical sensations and feelings were reported whilst people were having the Reiki. Pain relief, people seeing colours, people feeling the heat, and how that felt soothing, which is interesting. And again, somebody else talking about the tingling right through the body. And then we then talked to the women about how they had felt after they'd had the Reiki. So all of those quotes before are things that they felt during the Reiki. And these are their experiences after the Reiki. So there were a number of physical effects, some emotional benefits, some cognitive improvements. And I'll give you some examples of these in a minute. And people said that sometimes they felt the benefits on the actual day, and others they felt the benefits lasted up to a week after the Reiki session. So it's not just the wonderful feelings that they have whilst they're having the Reiki, but also the long-term impact that the Reiki has. So some of the physical effects, people commented on how they felt that it benefited their sleep, and helped them to sleep. Other people talked about pain and how it had helped to relieve pain, you know, for 4 or 5 days, that they felt more comfortable. Also, people commented about how they felt quite energised, and having treatment for cancer really can take it out of you. So to have something where their energy levels are much improved is you know, really beneficial for people, and they really appreciated that. And then other physical problems, coughing and breathlessness, people reported that it had helped with those as well. And then in terms of emotional effects, again, during the time having Reiki, people felt an emotional release after they'd had the Reiki, and feelings of calm, relaxation and peace seemed to continue. And people also talked about how it had relieved some depression, and I've got some really lovely quotes from people just to highlight that for you too. So this is a quote about the emotional release and how the Reiki had helped after they'd had the Reiki therapy. And I think that's a really powerful quote from somebody, to feel that Reiki is so beneficial that it actually helps to pull her back from the cliff. And I think that's so amazing if we can be helping people in this way. You know, hopefully one day more and more people will be able to experience Reiki as part of the NHS, and hopefully these sorts of studies that we're doing will help to achieve that, really. Another quote about how the Reiki had helped after the Reiki session. Feeling much more lightened up and released. And then a quote about the feelings of calm and relaxation and peace. And then I think a knock-on impact really about when she talks about being more accepting and very grateful, and a lot more clarity. And I think when you have something like Reiki, it really taps into that more spiritual side of people. And instead of people being very angry and negative, it seemed to help to put a different spin on the way that they viewed life. And obviously it's a really small study, and there's not huge numbers of participants, but this study, we can build on this study and explore it in more people, and gain more evidence going forward. And then a number of the participants talked about how it had helped relieve depression. And sorry, this is where the Yorkshire comes in. She got her out of the deep blackness she were in. And I think, you know, there's not many other treatments that people are having for cancer that probably get you out, or people would describe it, got them out of a deep blackness. And I think, again, that just shows the depth of the Reiki and how that really helps people at that more emotional level. And then looking at the cognitive effects of the Reiki after they'd had it, and again I'll show you some quotes. So it seemed to really help people with their everyday life and gave them hope. For some people it said it improved their self-confidence and their ability to cope with life. So here's a quote about how somebody had been helped with their everyday life. And this person's actually, she's actually a doctor, and she felt that she was able to work better because she herself was calmer and not in a state of panic, really. For other people it seemed to give them hope. And that ability to look forward and just put a different perspective on life. And then another quote about hope. And then we also talked to people then, moving on, about once they'd had the Reiki, what did they now think about Reiki and how would they describe it to other people? And people, it was really, I mean, if you remember at the beginning, nobody really understood about Reiki. They were all a bit sceptical. And whilst one person thought she was waiting for a miracle, really, she didn't really know how it worked and what it was going to do. But they were talking much more positively. People couldn't wait for the next session of Reiki. They wanted more of it. They didn't want it to stop. They felt it really had a massive impact. They were really impressed with how Reiki had helped them, and people said they were amazed by the experience. It seemed to be helping people cope with the cancer treatment and to give them some normality in their lives and just a bit of a break from all the medical attention. And a few people commented on how it was like a still meditation. And also they were able to understand how it worked because they'd experienced the way that the energy moved around in their body and the release that they felt. So they could actually understand it, because it is a difficult concept. Even when you're describing it to people, they've really got to have it to understand how that might feel for them. So this was one of the quotes of the lady saying how she felt afterwards. And she talks about how the Reiki seemed to get her into a trance, whereas the other complementary therapies that she had didn't quite get her into that same state. And again, that's another powerful benefit, I think, of Reiki. And like I say, people really looking forward to the next session and knowing that it's going to really help them. And this lady talking about how she's helping herself and how she really felt that that was really empowering to be able to do that. And I think that this is a really interesting quote, talking about how she felt that again, this is not somebody who's been told about how Reiki works really, but she really felt that the positive energy from the Reiki was really overriding the negative energy in her mind and body, and that was something that she really appreciated. So I've rattled through lots of findings there and lots of quotes. I hope that I didn't go too fast through those. Just to summarise then, again, to stress that it is a small study, but if we don't, you have to start somewhere with studies, and what we found was that the Reiki seemed to offer people a real escape from the strains and stresses of living with cancer, and that they described the sensations relating to a movement of energy and a release of emotional energy, and that feeling of inner peace and relaxation and a sense of being cared for, and that it gave them an ability to clear their minds and to forget about the anxiety and stresses of the cancer. And in addition, there were lots of physical benefits: pain relief, improved sleep, reduced symptoms and better energy levels. There were the emotional benefits, the improved feelings of wellness, calm and peace, and reduced depression. And then the cognitive benefits, such as the sense of hope and improved self-confidence. And the women sort of reported a cumulative effect, so they felt that they were able to relax quicker each time that they had it, and that the impact lasted not just during the Reiki session, but also for a period of time after. So our future plans were submitting the paper for publication. This week I'm also going to be in London presenting the results at a conference called CAMStrand, which is a complementary therapies conference. We want to either identify or, if necessary, develop tools to capture the broader sensations, such as the energy release and the release of emotional strain. And that the ultimate aim is to have a larger longitudinal study in women after they've had their treatment for cancer. It's not easy to get funding for Reiki research at all, and it may be that we need to tap into a bigger study that's looking at medical treatments, but also quality of life issues. But we do have contacts with people in the cancer research field, because both Serena and I have worked in that field. But if there's anybody here, or if anybody knows anybody who is interested in being involved in research, then we'd love to make contact. It's always more powerful when there's more people involved. I really hope that you've found that interesting. I'm more than happy to take questions either tonight or on my email address or telephone number. And thank you very much.
No, that was great. Thank you, Maxine. That was really good, really interesting. So we've now got some time left. So if anybody does have any questions, if you want to put your hand up by pressing that little hand icon, or typing something in the box, I can. I'll just take the. Yeah. So you can either type your question or raise your hand, and I will then open your microphone so you can ask the question directly. Anybody got any questions? If you're too shy to come on live, just type in your question. Right, while I'm waiting for the questions, Maxine, I'm just going to take the controls back so that I can then bring up my last slide when I'm ready for it. Okay, well, I've got your slide for the minute. Everybody quiet this evening? Nobody got any questions? Okay, Laura, let me just have a look here. Right, so Laura just says, I just wanted to say thank you. It was very informative and gives us something to think about. So thank you for your comment, Laura. Great. Glad you enjoyed that. Anybody else want to ask anything or make any comments? I just flick down through. Right, there's another one. And Rosemary asks, was there a difference in effect depending on the amount of Reiki received?
Well, we weren't really able to ascertain that from the study. Because it was a retrospective study, we didn't really, well, partly because it was a retrospective study, but also we wouldn't have had enough participants to look at that. I think that because most people had a similar amount of Reiki, at the hospices they tended to have a little bit less Reiki in terms of it might be half an hour rather than an hour-long session. But we couldn't really, I couldn't really tell you the difference with the study that we did. That's why going forward, having a longitudinal study where it would be much more controlled, so everybody would have a certain number of sessions of Reiki, and it might be that we would do a study where some people had 5 sessions and other people had 10 sessions, and then we could look at whether there was a difference between the two groups. But in the current study, we weren't really able to look at those differences.
No. Right. Fair enough. I'll just have a quick scroll through. Anybody else want to add anything? Now, of course, as Maxine says, if you think of anything later, or if you're actually listening to the recording of this, because a lot more people have registered for the webinar than are actually on the live webinar, Maxine's email and phone number is there, and she's very kindly said she's happy to answer any questions or queries. And of course, if any of you are interested in helping out in any research in the future, she'd also like to hear from you. And of course, you can contact us in the Reiki Guild office as well. Okay, looks like there's something else there. Okay, Rosemary says, thank you so much for a great webinar. Okay, Damien has put, being a retrospective survey, it was comprised of those surviving cancer. I expect it would be enlightening to see within your future study the effect on those that had experienced greater peace or calm prior to passing. So I guess that's the case. All your 10 participants are still surviving. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and we actually excluded people who had a prognosis of less than 3 months.
Right.
Mainly because our focus of interest going forward is that period after the more rehabilitative period rather than the end of life period. Not that that's not important, it's just, you know, we're particularly interested in how Reiki can be used to help people in that transition, really, from being a cancer patient where, you know, it's really intense, and then suddenly they tend to just get dropped off the system. They might be told, right, I don't need to see you every month now, we'll see you in a year. And from my previous work, that's really difficult for people. You know, they've been followed up really intensely, and suddenly they're left to get on with things, and don't always have the emotional tools to do that. And so that's why I'm particularly interested in that period after they've had the primary treatment, and they're trying to rehabilitate back into normal life, whether Reiki has a role there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great, thank you. So Neil says, cancer responds extremely well to vibration, musical sound, and colour, red/orange, especially in tumorous cancer. Have you any experience of this in your studies?
No, I mean, I don't. I think that for me, a lot of physical problems arise when there's a blockage of energy, and for me, that's how Reiki can help relieve some of those problems. In terms of, you know, specific colours, we didn't really explore that in the study.
No, and I think you can't really explore more than one thing at a time, because then you don't know which it was that actually made the difference. Okay, Damien says thank you for your comments on his question. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? I'll just quickly, because there's quite a few people on the call this evening, it takes me a while to scroll down through. Doesn't look like anybody else has got any comments. Okay, so this is last chance to comment or ask a question. Okay, so obviously if you think of something later, come through to the office or email Maxine. So I'll just put our last slide up. So if you're on this call this evening or listening to the recording and you are not a member of the Reiki Guild and you would like to find out more about what we do and what we offer our members, you can go to the website, which is thereikiguild.co.uk. You can send an email to the address there, or you can call the office. Now, the office isn't manned full time, but if you leave a message on the answer phone, someone will come back to you. So again, if you do have any questions, if you're listening to the recording, or if you think of anything after we shut down in a minute, come through to either our office or to Maxine. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. It was a really good webinar, lots of interest in the topic this evening. So thank you very much, Maxine.
Thank you.
And good evening, everybody. And I will now switch off our recording.